All right, real quick at the beginning here, I want to get back into a couple things that I covered in prior videos based on new information that I came across recently. The first is relating to the March 25th lunar eclipse, which featured the headline, Donald Trump bond reduced by 68% to 175 million. This was the headline from the afternoon of March 25th, 2024. And in the video where I went over this headline, I got into how Flight 175 was one of the flights on 9/11, and 68% has that resonance to 1968 and the role that that year played in the ritual 33 years before it transpired, in the context of the mini ritual, where there was this 9/11 1968 quote-unquote accidental plane crash in France. And then 11 days later, there was a total solar eclipse on September 22nd, 1968. So that was kind of a mini 9/11 ritual as it related to 9/11 2001, and then the twin of that ritual, which was Donald Trump, elected on 11/9. The second 9/11, or the second tower, as it were. But somebody sent me a comment pointing out to me that 68% of 175 is 119. What are the odds that, in the context I just went over, the numbers relating to this bond would so precisely reflect the 9/11 ritual to the point where even 68% of 175 is 9/11 or 11/9. However you want to view it. Donald Trump is the 11/9, and then the event that he is intertwined within is 9/11. They are mirrors of each other. Then I came across this story from CNN, which has the thumbnail here depicting Donald Trump as Batman. And I guess I never realized that you could view the bat signal as a D like this, if you kind of draw it in a not so defined way. It really does look like a D when it's flipped on its side like this. So you have Donald Trump's helicopter giving the D signal for Batman as it relates to Donald. And then, of course, there's the moon, Donald Trump being the moonchild and having this resonance to Batman through the Matthew Perry ritual, as well as the Christopher Nolan part of the ritual via The Dark Knight Rises. And really the whole trilogy, but particularly what's in that third installment. And of course, the helicopter has the X blades here. So you have Donald Trump, Batman, the X, in terms of the Great American Eclipse and the role that the moonchild would play in this ritual. But anyways, in this actual story, Trump says, "I am Batman." And I'll play that for you.
Is apparently Batman. Yes, that's what he told a 9-year-old boy from Iowa who rode on his helicopter this weekend at the Iowa State Fair. Watch the YouTube video.
Yes.
Mr. Trump,
Yes.
are you Batman?
I am Batman.
Mr. Trump, are you Batman? I am Batman. And he says this in his helicopter. If this is the first video that you're seeing and you have not watched the Matthew Perry video, it might not take on the weight that it should. The fact that Donald Trump says, "I am Batman," in the context of his helicopter, the X, and the Great American Eclipse. Given how Matthew Perry relates to Donald Trump through 17 in particular, but also the fact that Matthew Perry died in a hot tub or water on a lunar eclipse, and the song played at his funeral features a music video showing a total solar eclipse. All of that is going on at the same time that he has this Instagram ritual featuring the moon and Batman in the week leading up to his death. And even going back to his book that he wrote, he has this affinity for Batman. He's always saying things along those lines, I am Batman. At the same time that Matthew Perry then stars in the film 17 again, which has the similar time travel, quantum leap, parallel reality themes that are associated with Donald Trump. And it also has the water theme where Matthew Perry is hit with a drop of water, which leads him to fall over a bridge into water that then sends him to a different point in his consciousness back in time where he can relive certain aspects of his life. And that film is titled 17 again. Matthew Perry has his 911 call at 4:07 p.m. and then is pronounced dead at 4:17 p.m. QAnon has its first post on 10/28/2017, and 10/28/2023 is the day that Matthew Perry died. So there's this whole ritual going on with Matthew Perry's death as it relates to Donald Trump and this 2017-2024 Great American Eclipse that is the twin 9/11, which then has this feedback loop into Batman for whatever reason. And you have Trump here right as it all started saying, I am Batman. Unbelievable stuff, right? But moving on into a recap of this whole thing relating to Donald Trump, the moonchild, and his birthday. Donald Trump's birthday in New York, June 14th, 1946, during a total lunar eclipse and blood moon. Aleister Crowley wrote a novel titled The Moonchild, and this is taken in the context of Babylon, quote-unquote, rituals conducted by L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons from January to March 1946, which were designed to incarnate the Thelemic goddess Babylon in a human being. Crowley wrote a letter on June 14th, 1946, the same day that Donald Trump was born, essentially making fun of Parsons and Hubbard. I mean, he calls Hubbard a con artist in the letter and then says Parsons has gone mad. But simultaneously, he mentions the moonchild on the day that Donald Trump was born, even though it is in relationship to what Parsons and Hubbard were doing in their rituals, which they had taken from Crowley's stuff. Much later, Strange Angel, a show about Jack Parsons, premiered on June 14th, 2018, the same day that Donald Trump was born. And the first scene is a blood moon, which was the moon under which Trump was born during a lunar eclipse. And Parsons just so happens to also have a crater on the moon named after him. So while it's impossible that Trump is the actual moonchild that Hubbard Parsons tried to produce via those rituals, given the timeline, it's physically impossible for that to have taken place because they were doing the rituals after Donald Trump had been conceived. But still, it could be a symbolic tell, quote unquote, to sort of amplify the perceived power that Trump has via the revelations of previously occulted information like this about him. And then in parentheses, I say here, of course, I'm not ruling out the possibility that his birth was part of some type of ritual within the Trump family as a part of the larger bloodline rituals. I'm not ruling that out just because it doesn't fit in the timeline with the Parsons-Hubbard stuff. But at the same time, it could be some kind of symbolic ritual that they attached to him that didn't necessarily have some kind of Rosemary's Baby inception going on, if you know what I mean. Either way, at the very least, as a lunar eclipse baby, he is a quote-unquote moonchild in terms of the gravitational pull that his programming has on the water in our bodies, and the water, quote-unquote, that is the stream of consciousness, or the perceptual river of time, as it were. Donald Trump was infused with moonchild resonance and is the personification of 9/11-2001, the Gemini man twin, quote unquote, that would spearhead the ritual symbolic destruction of the USA as the racist, domestic terrorist, conspiracy theorist, MAGA QAnon president elected 11/9/16 in the lead up to the 2017-2024 Great American Eclipse. There are these two paths of total solar eclipses, one in 2017, one in 2024, that mark the USA with an X, and Donald Trump is president in 2017, and now he is running again in 2024, and there is the December 14th, 2020 total solar eclipse in the middle, which coincided with Operation Warp Speed and the first mRNA injection given to somebody outside of the trials. Meaning not only is there all the domestic terrorist stuff going on, but the COVID-19 anti-science misinformation angle played into it as well, all designed to limit speech or create the conditions where speech would need to be limited based on what the internet is allowing to transpire along those lines. Obviously, there are going to be many different angles to the ritual destruction of an empire as large as the United States of America. It's going to take many years, and there's going to be many different agendas that are chipping away at various parts of it. Which I think is confusing a lot of people as it relates to this April 8th eclipse, where they're thinking some kind of big event is going to happen on that day relating to destruction of the country, but it's more fluid than that. It ebbs and flows like water, and yes, some of the events surround the actual eclipse dates, like that first mRNA injection did, but other times it's just kind of in the near vicinity of the larger trend or the larger energetic structure of whatever is going on above. This is a fluid thing that's going to continue long after this eclipse comes and goes on April 8th, which is only 4 days away as I record this. And as I went into in one of the earlier videos that I did on this subject, that's all by design in terms of why it's being hyped up in the media so much now, where they want it to be a sort of 2012 or Y2K situation where everyone goes, oh, look, there was so much hype about this April 8th eclipse and something happening in terms of doom, and then nothing came, and oh, it's just another failed prediction. Well, hopefully, if you're listening to the videos that I have done on this, you won't be thinking that when April 8th comes and goes and there's no huge thing that transpires. You'll be thinking of it in the terms that I'm going into here, and I have gone into in all the prior videos. Anyways, moving on to Donnie Darko, which is a film about 9/11 and Donald Trump. There is no other way around it. It was intentionally made with those themes in mind, and symbolically and subconsciously, those themes are embedded within every scene almost, especially as it relates to Donald Trump and eclipses and 9/11. In any event, the plot starts on October 2nd, 1988, and the opening song of the theatrical cut is The Killing Moon, which sets the scene for what Donald Trump is symbolically in their subconscious programming. He is the killing moonchild, right? He's destroying the United States of America and creating the quote-unquote New World Order from its ashes. That is the role that he is symbolically playing as it relates to the Great American Eclipse. Interestingly, the chords of the song were based on David Bowie's Space Oddity played backwards. It's that song played backwards in terms of the chord structure. And Space Oddity is a tale about a fictional astronaut named Major Tom, and the title and subject matter were partly inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey, which takes you back to 1968 when A Space Odyssey was released in early April, near an eclipse in April of 1968, which obviously ties into 9/11 and 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of the monolith that was at ground zero. And then further, that links in Donald Trump through his monolith in the United Nations Plaza, where it's actually called Trump World Tower, which I got into in a prior video going through all of these relationships along those lines. But here it is, just to refresh your memory. We have the 2001: A Space Odyssey monolith at ground zero, which has the phone number 212-693-2001, further encoding the 2/26/93 original World Trade Center bombing on February 26, 1993, the same day that Falling Down was released, starring Michael Douglas, which alluded to the towers then falling down later. And Michael Douglas will now play Franklin, which relates to France and the original 9/11 1968 plane crash in France, Flight 1611, and how the founding fathers, quote unquote, that Franklin was a part of created America through the 1776 Declaration of Independence, which is now going to be destroyed through the fallout of quote unquote Civil War, where you have Franklin, Fallout, and Civil War all being released April 11th and April 12th, just a few days after this April 8th, 2024 eclipse. This is a pill bottle that they show in Donnie Darko, where they very explicitly refer to Donnie as Donald. And the date here on the pill bottle is 7/24/88. Before he became president, we would have just thought that was another 9/11 reference. But now, in hindsight, we know that was a literal 11/9 reference, knowing he would be elected in the early morning hours officially on 11/9/2016. In other words, Donald Darko, a very literal reference to Donald Trump, 9/11, 11/9, and the Great American Eclipse as the moonchild, born under a lunar eclipse. And remember, October 2nd, 2024, later this year, is going to feature a solar eclipse over Easter Island, and October 2nd is the same day that the plot of Donnie Darko begins. And this eclipse maybe will signify some potential Trump resurrection theme 1 month before the 2024 USA presidential election that Donald Trump will be a part of. Very interesting that there's this Easter Island eclipse on October 2nd, 2024 in the context of Donnie Darko starting on October 2nd, 1988. So you have Donald Trump Darko and 88 miles per hour referencing the two films that encode all of this the most, at least as far as we're aware, Donnie Darko and Back to the Future. Now, as many people have gone into, the sun and moon independently make what are referred to as analemmas, which visually show the difference between artificial time and quote-unquote solar time. This is why we have things like leap days in leap years, because the solar clock doesn't sync up with the artificial mechanical clock that was created on planet Earth, that we refer to as time. So right away you have these analemmas resonating with the concept of a difference in time, different timelines. So as I understand it, what happens is someone sets up a camera in one spot and they take a picture every so often at the same time, and it results in this pattern that the sun will make over time in the sky, which is very clearly mirroring an 8. Likewise, the moon makes a similar pattern here where someone sets up a camera, does the same thing, and you get this figure 8 structure to the pattern of where the moon is in the sky, depending on where you take the picture on Earth and what time you take it. In terms of eclipses and the relationship orbitally speaking, between the sun and the moon, you have these two 88s interacting with each other. And these images, as I understand it, again, I'm a novice when it comes to astronomy and all this stuff, but as I understand it, the fact that it takes this shape represents how time is different from the solar perspective compared to our perspective. So you have this association between 88 and time through these analemmas. And then more recently, to show that relationship, someone did this experiment, took the pictures, but they set it up so that one of the pictures would show an actual eclipse here. And you can really get the idea of how the two bodies are interacting, and sometimes they sync up in terms of the two 88s that they're both making. And I think that's really the idea as it relates to eclipses and time in terms of the programming that they're putting into all of the media. Donald Trump, as the moonchild born under a lunar eclipse, is altering the timeline. He's a resonator with time in that way. And they very clearly show that in the films that script Donald Trump into them, like Donnie Darko and Back to the Future, which focus on the idea of time travel or parallel tangent realities. In many ways, the solar reality that these images are depicting is a different timeline compared to the one that was artificially created on Earth via mechanical time. And go figure that Donald Trump gave a speech in Eagle Pass, Texas on the leap day, in the leap year 2024, when Eagle Pass is the first city that the path of totality will cross into in the United States of America on April 8th. And the Mexican city on the other side of the border is black stone. The black stone has a lot of alchemical resonance, transforming lead into gold. And obviously the orbit of Mercury is 88 days. So 88 has an association to Mercury as well, meaning the black stone in the context of 88 and Eagle Pass on a leap year as it relates to these eclipses, 88 and time, and transforming lead into gold, transforming civilization from an old world order into a new world order. And as a part of that ritual, transforming the United States of America from what it was into something else, which is why Donald Trump was selected to be the twin of the 9/11/2001 event, 88, Donnie Darko. I could be making all of that up, but it seems relatively accurate. I don't know. You'll have to be the judge of that. But it really seems like Donald Trump is the metaphorical alchemical Mercury. And that ties into the dark matter idea. How they released the first dark matter album 17 days before the 2017 August 21st eclipse, on the same day that the Dark Tower film was released, going back to Trump's monolith resonance, which is a gate to a parallel reality, going back to the time idea. And then Pearl Jam is releasing their Dark Matter album April 19th, one day before Hitler's birthday. And we'll get to Trump's connection with Hitler along these lines in 88. So it's like both eclipses are bookended by dark matter, and Donald Trump has all of that association to dark matter via that symbolic resonance that those albums are putting into this cycle or window. At the same time that there was an article published where the very first image of a black hole was taken, and later that day, there's this image of Trump's eye as a black hole. He's the alchemical Mercury that will transform everything in the context of this ritual. The 88, both in terms of Mercury and in terms of the sun and the moon interaction, which can eclipse each other as they dance in the sky and orbit in tandem with the Earth. The three-body problem that is metaphorically that dance above and the interaction of this propaganda and subconscious programming with our eyes. And the three-body problem related to that controlled orbit spinning out of control, which is a metaphor for them not being able to control your eye, and thus your behavior or what you believe or how you perceive reality, which then plays into the larger propaganda and programming that's designed to create something. Turning the lead into gold. Going back to Zemeckis and Back to the Future, the very last scene of The Walk, which was released 30 years after 1985, which has all of that connection to the 30-year storyline in Back to the Future. But the last scene, they show the Twin Towers, which are lead originally, turning to gold in the way that they shoot it. And that's Zemeckis telling you, yes, we turned this ritual from lead to gold, metaphorically speaking, which is you and your perception, your three-body problem, your black holes. We quantum leaped your consciousness into something else. Or that's what we're in the process of doing, right? It started on 9/11/2001. We've always been doing it, but that was symbolically something else starting. I feel like I might be rambling a little bit, but hopefully I made the 88 thing a little more clear. And why that's so tied into Donnie Darko as it relates to the moonchild, Donald Trump. As I'm sure pretty much everyone listening to this is aware, the Donnie Darko countdown to the end of the world, quote unquote, the end of the tangent universe, is 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds, which when you add those numbers up equals 88. Which, as I was just going into, relates to the quantum leap out of time, quote unquote, via this massive ritual. The license plate in Back to the Future saying out of time. Along those lines. So most people are probably pretty aware of the stuff I just went into there relating to 88, but I want to get into 88 now in terms of the start of Donald Trump's political career. And this begins in September of 1987. On September 2nd, 1987, readers of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe found in their newspapers a full-page open letter from Donald J. Trump. He had spent $94,801 on what amounted to ad space. To the American people, it began. And it's interesting that this was in September of 1987, and New York, Washington, and Boston have that resonance to the flights on 9/11. A month after that, October 6 to 7, 1987, there is a penumbral lunar eclipse. And then a couple weeks later, on October 22nd, 1987, Trump gives a speech in New Hampshire, which is the state with the first presidential primary every year in America, for those of you who don't live here. And the news articles noted that people were outside waving Trump in 88 and Trump for president signs, even though he was not running for president. He was just doing this speech as a favor to one of his friends, or something along those lines. It was organized by someone else, and it wasn't any sort of overt presidential thing, but still there was these people out there, potentially paid to do so, holding Trump in 88 signs, so that the news articles could write that into history and associate Trump in 88 with politics and the presidential office. All of this happening just a couple weeks after a lunar eclipse. And this is what I was discussing earlier, how it's not always on the day itself. More so the month of October in 1987 had this lunar eclipse resonance. And so Donald Trump gives his first political quote-unquote speech in that month, which obviously is the same month that Donnie Darko is set in. Then on November 1st, 1987, Trump releases The Art of the Deal, which puts him on the New York Times bestseller list and kind of launches his persona further into the mainstream consciousness. Makes him a little bit more of a celebrity along those lines. Then on August 15th, 1988, there is the Republican National Convention, the first time Trump ever attended a political convention. Trump is interviewed by Chris Wallace, who says to him, "You have said that if you ran for president, you would win." And Trump responds, "I like to win, and I think I'd probably have a pretty good chance." And this is kind of out of the ordinary in terms of what Trump would normally respond with when someone questioned him on whether he was going to run for president or get involved in politics. He would always say, "Oh, no, I don't think so." And this is the first time that he kind of said, "Yeah, I like to win, and I think I'd probably have a pretty good chance," at the 1988 convention. He endorses George Bush in both interviews, and he's kind of there to do that. He even introduces George Bush at one point. I can't remember if it's on the campaign trail or at this convention. But it's easy to forget when you've been doing this for so long, the very basic facts. Like the fact that George Bush gave the quote-unquote New World Order speech on September 11th, 1990. And then his son would preside over 9/11/2001, which kicked off the whole thing. So the Republican convention from August 15th to the 18th in 1988 is then followed on August 27th, 1988 by a partial lunar eclipse. Meaning Donald Trump attends his first convention publicly in the month of a lunar eclipse, kind of echoing how a year earlier in 1987 he gave his first political speech in the month of a lunar eclipse. Again, he's the moonchild, so of course it would be coordinated this way because it amplifies his energy in the same way that he is designed to amplify everything that's going on right now with his eclipse resonance or his moonchild resonance as it relates to their propaganda. Then, on September 11th, 1988, there is a solar eclipse, which had an eclipse magnitude, coincidentally, of 0.9377, which are two 9/11 flight numbers. But on September 11th, 1988, right after this lunar eclipse and right after Trump's first public appearance at a convention, there's an eclipse for Donnie Darko on September 11th, which goes back to that total solar eclipse on 9/22/68, 11 days after the quote-unquote accidental French plane crash on 9/11/1968. So a lunar eclipse plus another September 11th eclipse in 1988, Donnie Darko, all of that 88 resonance that I was just getting into, right after Trump attended his first political convention. Donnie Darko takes place over 28 days, which is 2 8s, going back to the analemma eclipse stuff. And then this is just speculation. But Trump is elected president in 2016, which is 28 years after 1988. Meaning it's almost as if the 9/11/2001 ritual was a tangent parallel reality in the subconscious mind that ended or closed, quote unquote, on 11/9/16 when Donald Trump was elected president and thereafter personified and embodied 9/11/2001 into the actual real world as the twin of that event. The quantum leap then is Donald Trump symbolically jumping our minds out of time, quote unquote, in the context of the Great Reset, where our perception of time no longer fits with the old timeline due to the assimilation of biology and our minds into the digital internet AI parallel, quote unquote, reality. And in that way, it's very kind of figure 8-ish symbolically, where the timelines are kind of crossing each other like the sun and the moon do via eclipses, but then they have this feedback loop kind of path where timelines branch off and then come back together, and then branch off and come back together. And the 9/11/2001 timeline, subconsciously speaking, sort of branched off from the main conscious timeline that everyone was observing. That was going on under the surface, as it were, in the dark matter, affecting reality, but not in a clearly observable way consciously, at least when it started, before people became aware of it and could start to see it. But you could kind of view maybe that branching off in 1968 symbolically, metaphorically, a new timeline or parallel tangent reality that then crossed with actual physical reality on 9/11/2001, a total solar eclipse, as it were, in terms of the timelines, where they merged temporarily. That event then manifested into the real world, and then the timelines move apart from each other again, and they come back together on 11/9/16 when Donald Trump, the personification of 9/11, is elected into office in the United States of America. And then the timeline sort of standardizes and streamlines itself into a reality where 9/11 exists in physical reality. And then eventually, as a mirror of the subconscious mind, the internet world, that multiverse, via the three-body problem, will eventually standardize into one timeline as they gain control of it and merge the mind with it. It will become the one timeline where censorship dictates all things that are true, and there is no deviation from that, or you are removed from society. So like the sun and the moon and the analemma, it's always this related 88 feedback loop in and out path that the timelines we experience are going through. And whenever they create something new in the subconscious realm, it sort of branches off from the main timeline that is our perception. And then eventually that timeline merges into physical reality when enough minds are programmed in the subconscious parallel reality. I don't know, like I said, I'm just kind of spitballing with all of this stuff, but hopefully I'm making it somewhat clear how time travel, parallel realities, and quantum leaps relate to the 88s and how Trump fits into all of that, metaphorically and symbolically. And indeed, how that relates to physical reality itself that we are experiencing that will, if they get their way, eventually merge with the quote-unquote Ethernet through the World Wide Web that is catching everything. The subconscious dark matter web made into reality via this technology. And going back to that metaphor, there is a temporary parallel reality that we refer to as truth on the internet that branched off at the same time that 9/11 came into physical reality. As soon as that event happened, there was another timeline or parallel reality that branched off in the mind where all of a sudden people started questioning what was really going on. And so they had to plan in all these fake conspiracy theories and controlled opposition assets to corrupt and derail that kind of thing, to prevent it from becoming the dominant timeline, knowing that what they did was so blatant and obvious that it would create that as a sort of permutation of them messing with the time stream in that way. And they're doing the same thing with Donald Trump now. It's a mirror. It's repeating. It's the same imagery of the 8, the small circle merging into the larger circle, which is an eclipse, of course. But also, it's where those things cross and then loop back around and cross again. So you have all of the controlled opposition related to Donald Trump, which we saw through the creation of Pizzagate, MAGA, and QAnon, which culminated together as this controlled opposition, conspiracy theorist, domestic terrorist narrative and movement that is doing a similar thing to the original 9/11 truth movement that this movement came out of and was infused within from the beginning, which you can see through the role of Alex Jones in all of this, how he played a role in mainstreaming conspiracy theories into the Republican Party through his interaction with Donald Trump, so that now they have this divide where one political party in a very mainstream way is known as a conspiracy theorist party now, that is trying to destroy America. And at the same time, the other side says the exact same thing. Oh no, that deep state is trying to destroy America. Those narratives are, in terms of an image, an 8, where they're looping in feedback loops, and sometimes they cross. The realm of the subconscious mind and all of that programming manifests into reality, and those events are so impactful that then other timelines branch off. Okay, so having got into all of that, now I want to get into all of these quote-unquote coincidental 88 references as it relates to the news and Donald Trump. The first one here, on June 17, 2020, 88 Facebook ads posted by the accounts of President Donald Trump, the Trump campaign, and Vice President Mike Pence are removed by Facebook. The ads featured an upside-down red triangle, a symbol used by the Nazi Party in World War II to identify political dissidents in concentration camps. Now, it just so happens that a couple days after this 88 Facebook ad story hits the news, there's an annular solar eclipse on the summer solstice, June 21st, 2020. Again, amplifying the effect of Donald Trump, the moonchild, eclipse baby's gravitational pull on the collective subconscious. The first sentence of the 88 ads contained 14 words. The number 14 symbolizes a popular alt-right slogan, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children." 88 stands for Hail Hitler, H being the 8th letter of the alphabet, so 2 H's are 88. Together, 1488 is often used to signal allegiance to an alt-right group and the ideas of white supremacy. Given what they associated Donald Trump with as the twin of 9/11 and how the white supremacist narrative is playing into domestic terrorism, it is no accident that the 14-word ad was placed 88 times in this context, all coinciding with an annular solar eclipse to amplify this idea that Trump equals Nazi, Trump equals Hitler, in the minds of the people who are exposed to the other side of the propaganda. And this ties into the First Amendment, where you have excessive free speech is a breeding ground for more Trumps. So hopefully you see how they're going to eventually use Trump to try to curtail what is known as free speech, especially in the United States of America, where this is something fundamental that just cannot be altered under circumstances like this normally. But if they associate Trump and what he created with quote-unquote racism, quote-unquote hate, and they do that effectively, they can carve an exception into the First Amendment where anything they label hate speech is banned. And eventually they might even be able to pass a law along those lines that could send you to jail if you say something they deem as quote-unquote hate. And in this way, they circumvent the First Amendment eventually. I mean, they're already doing it with social media. But this is a huge part of the role that Trump is playing as it relates to the Great American Eclipse, because everything America is represented by the First Amendment right to speak freely, free from government control in any way, shape, or form. The original U.S. Civil War was 1,488 days, or 1488, and the DeLorean has to get to 88 miles an hour at 10:04 p.m. in relation to 9/11 2001 and 9/11 twin Donald Trump. This is just my speculation, but in the context of the Back to the Future ritual as it relates to 9/11 and Trump, the success of getting the DeLorean or the time travel device to 88 miles per hour in that context on one level could relate to succeeding in his role as the racist, quote unquote, MAGA Hitler archetype. Hat tip to the commenter who pointed that out to me, by the way. Now remember, in terms of the Civil War theme, the 2017-2024 Great American Eclipse center point is quote unquote Little Egypt, which has an area code of 618, and the American Civil War started in 1861, featuring the South's ex-Confederate flag. As I just went into in the prior video, Leave the World Behind has the Eclipse bed frame scene, which is right here for those of you who did not see that video. You have this very clear depiction, especially in the way that it's lit, giving you this imagery of the three eclipses that relate to the Great American Eclipse, but particularly these two in 2017 and 2024. Although this one definitely relates in terms of Israel and Palestine because it took place just about a week after October 7th, 2023. And then remember East Palestine as it related to the path of this eclipse and how the Ohio River eventually filters into the Mississippi River down here in Cairo, Illinois, which is evoking more Egypt resonance via Little Egypt as it relates to where the Nile splits off. And then how that 2027 eclipse will go through Egypt over Luxor into the Red Sea. That Leave the World Behind scene is followed by a cicada reference, and there's a northern brood and a southern brood that are coming out at the same time, or their two timelines are synchronizing. Think about the symbolism there, where you have a north and south brood, the timeline synchronizing because they're on different timelines as far as when they emerge, and they only synchronize every 221 years. In the context of 618, the American Civil War X 1488, 1004, 88 miles per hour, you have these two timelines synchronizing. Kind of what I was getting at about the eights and the timelines. You have this synchronization that happens every once in a while. And in the context of the Civil War, you have this North versus South, Illinois versus the South, Lincoln Civil War resonance to these two cicada broods that are emerging in 2024, right at the same time as this April 8th, 2024 eclipse. That's part of the Great American Eclipse that has the Little Egypt resonance. And the scene that shows the eclipse is followed by this cicada reference, which is totally out of place because normally they don't make any noise. Clearly she's referring to a time when they are out, like they will be in 2024. The character, that is. Then they're having this conversation in a scene where the director depicts a great pyramid above them in a movie that was executive produced by Barack and Michelle Obama, and Barack Obama signs his O like the phi symbol, or 618, meaning 1.618, or the golden ratio, which I realized I've talked a lot about, but never showed the images like I did right there. Then the next scene is the flamingos in the pool, which has that Wonka Dune resonance in terms of the Messiah programming. Then the next scene is a music frequency scene where they're playing records right before another Havana, quote unquote, frequency weapon scene where the record skips and the power goes off. Going back to that whole frequency theme that I got into in Leave the World Behind, that's kind of layered throughout the whole thing. Then the next scene is the flood rescue story, which talks about this idea of the flood in a biblical sense and the warning signs that you get. And right after that warning sign flood scene, as it relates to the flood and God in the story, there is the Donnie Darko reference. And the very next scene after the Donnie Darko reference is the depiction of the lunar eclipse with the USA flag on the moon looking all tattered. Do you see the logical chain of reasoning there? And very intentional way those scenes were put together as it relates to all the stuff that I've just been getting into. And then right after the eclipse scene is the teeth falling out and the chaos. For those of you who watched the Leave the World Behind video, you'll remember that I couldn't remember the scene after the flamingos in the pool. Well, I went back and looked, and it really connected some dots along those lines. Hopefully I made it more clear this time around. Now, on June 16th, 2015, Trump announces his presidential run. He goes down a golden escalator outside of currency exchange. Time equals money, i.e. exchanging time, but also currency has a relationship to water, and Donald Trump is the moonchild, who has a gravitational pull on water or currency. So the currency exchange is symbolically the influence of the moonchild, as it will relate to the energetic exchange that's about to take place. This is him before he's about to go down the escalator, and I will play a little bit of it so you can see what I mean, where right before he starts his walk, you can see the currency exchange right up above him as he goes through it. That's so symbolic that they're showing you the currency exchange. Obviously, this is simultaneously referring to the quote-unquote New World Order monetary Bitcoin leading into CBDC digital currency system, which is a literal currency exchange that will take place if they get their way as well during this point in time. And Donald Trump kind of marked the explosion of Bitcoin onto the scene in a mainstream way in 2015 and 2016. I mean, that's when it really started going mainstream, when they artificially increased the price of those tulips known as digital coins, aka Bitcoin. Also, the 2027 eclipse goes through the Pillars of Hercules, which is on that Great Reset Time magazine cover with the missing piece being the Strait of Gibraltar, which has a lot of dollar sign resonance with the history of the dollar and how it came into being in Spain and the symbol they used. All kinds of things going on with this currency exchange symbolism as Donald Trump announces his presidential run. So he goes down the golden escalator, and I hope you caught that as it happened, where this sign fell off where it was situated and settled down here. This is Trump's monolith. This is the Dark Tower. This is Trump as the twin of 9/11. He's a falling tower, metaphorically speaking. And he's going down the escalator at the same time that this tower metaphorically falls. The same time his monolith falls, which you could also view as the UN monolith in those images. And how his monolith is in the UN plaza, which looks just like this sign. This was not an accident that this sign fell. At least I would doubt it is. I mean, who knows, right? Maybe that was a sign from forces beyond even their control. But I'll play that again. The sign falls. And I was looking at it to see if I could see her hand and if it went down and made contact with the sign or not. It does look like she maybe intentionally hit that. I don't know, but then she looks down to see what happened. Very interesting, right? The sign falls down as he descends the escalator, i.e. Trump is the personification of a falling tower, which then has all that resonance to the movie Falling Down, released 2/26/93, the phone number at the Millennium Hilton, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the monolith. Symbolically showing that Trump will take the USA down with him as the twin of 9/11. He goes down the escalator as opposed to up it. Most of the symbolism along those lines is always showing going up the staircase, But in this case, they invert it and show Trump going down the stairs. As that sign falls, he's the falling tower. Then we have more 88 stuff where June 29th, 2020, there's an $88 baseball sold on Trump merchandise store, which the media all runs with along the HH Hitler 88 narrative. November 19th, 2020, Forbes headline states, poll, 88% of Trump supporters appear to falsely believe Biden didn't legitimately win. What a coincidence that it's 88% of Trump supporters. Then there are the E. Jean Carroll cases, where there's the defamation case, and Trump is found liable for $83.3 million in damages. And then earlier, there's the sexual abuse damages case, where Trump is found liable for $5 million, or a total of $88.3 million that he owes E. Jean Carroll. September 6, 2016, Wall Street Journal headline, Donald Trump receives endorsement of 88 military leaders. What a coincidence. March 11th, 2016, Politico headline, 1988, the year Donald lost his mind. And I actually have that one up here somewhere. 1988, the year Donald lost his mind. At the early peak of his success, he pulled the trigger on a manic series of deals that nearly brought him down. Symbolically, I think what they're showing is that as it relates to the larger subconscious narrative, the person Donald Trump lost control of his mind in 1988 because it was being used for something else. Symbolically, then, his life went into turmoil, financially speaking. He lost control of his own body because it was being used as a part of something else. July 15th, 2018, New York Times headline, 88 million and counting, Trump amasses huge head start for 2020 campaign. July 15th, 2020, Trump tweet, 88 and 2 really won in endorsements this election cycle, and at Fox News was critical. Has anyone ever done so well? I doubt it. What a very interesting tweet, right? 88 and 2. Remember back to the two 88s and the analemmas and the sun and the moon and the eclipses and that whole thing. 88 and 2. And then he says, really won, which then goes back to the whole two towers becoming one thing, the One World Trade Center, Trump World Tower. The twin of 9/11. February 21st, 2024, Trump's campaign said it raised $8.8 million in January 2024. The first month of the year of this April 8th Great American Eclipse. 8.8 million raised. And remember, around that time, it was the Colorado Supreme Court and the insurrection clause dominating the news cycle. Late December into January. And the Maine Secretary of State doing the same thing, where the 2024 April 8th eclipse will exit through Caribou, Maine, going back to the deer and leave the world behind. March 14th, 2024, the Washington Post headline, breaking down the 88 charges Trump faces in his 4 indictments. Going back to the destruction of America theme that he's the first former president to ever be indicted and charged with a crime. Symbolically depicting the collapse of the office itself and the weaponization of the larger justice system, quote unquote, and the political system. Trump was facing 91 criminal counts across multiple jurisdictions, including 13 in Georgia. But now, after adjustments, in March of 2024, a couple weeks before the lunar eclipse, he's facing 88 criminal counts, including 10 in Georgia. So right before the bloodbath story, 322, and the eclipse key bridge window, Trump's counts are changed from 91 to 88. June 14th, 1946, this is Trump's birthday, remember, the Baruch Plan is proposed. Most of the sources refer to negotiations taking place at the United Nations in the last 3 months of 1946, where on June 14th, Bernard Baruch put forward his plan for the international control of atomic energy, essentially a world government plan. And this ties back into Trump World Tower at the UN Plaza and Digital World Acquisition, his media company. Very interesting that on his birthday, the same day Crowley sent that letter referencing the moonchild, there's this proposal for international control of atomic energy. Essentially a world government plan. One of the first suggestions of that type of thing in the immediate aftermath of World War II and the creation of the United Nations. This is crazy. Richard Kelly, the director of Donnie Darko, credits Christopher Nolan for getting Donnie Darko a theatrical release. Remember that Donnie Darko was released on January 19th, 2001, or 9/11. And then Christopher Nolan, of all people, considering everything I've gone into here, is the one who Kelly credits as getting Donnie Darko a theatrical release, and that was on October 26, 2001. Remembering that October 26, 1985 is the day when Doc Brown successfully tests time travel capabilities. And then leaving October 26, 1985, after the terrorist attack forces him to do so, Marty finds himself in Hill Valley beginning on November 5th, 1955, the day Doc Brown conceived the time travel invention. And of course, November 5th, 2024 is the next USA presidential election. Very interesting that that day is here in the context of Donnie Darko, October 26th, and then November 5th, because in a way, Donald Trump is going back in time. If he is elected as president again after losing the election prior and being out of the office. He's going back to when he was president in terms of the timeline. And incidentally, right before all of that happens, Doc Brown is in the DeLorean and suggesting various times that Marty could go see, or anyone could go see with the device. And he brings up specifically July 4th, 1776 and the birth of Christ, which are the two things that this ritual is designed to destroy in the context of America. What it was originally was, both in terms of when it was created and the people that originally populated it and their beliefs. But also just in general how Hollywood destroys Christ in general in all of its films. Zemeckis and producer Bob Gale had it written into their contracts there could be no further sequels without their permission, and both have sworn 1990's Back to the Future Part 3 is the end of the series. Obviously, they did this because the three films were a massive 9/11 ritual that can't be altered. That would be my speculation of why they had that in their contracts. But I bring this up because there is this sort of part 4 in one of the extras on the Blu-ray releases where Doc Brown prevents a nuclear holocaust in 2045 that relates to Biff Tannen's line, which is Donald Trump, of course. So you have this association between Donald Trump and nuclear Armageddon. And then that international control of atomic energy on his birthday in 1946, his literal birthday, they proposed that international control of atomic energy thing. And then you have the Christopher Nolan tie-in to Donnie Darko and all of the nuclear explosion resonance to the Nolan films, both in terms of the Batman trilogy, which ties into all of this stuff too, but then also Oppenheimer, which is all about the creation of the nuclear bomb, and then his brother is directing Fallout, which is released one day before Civil War and Franklin, right? So there's this nuclear bomb thing going on, and maybe this is just metaphorical as it relates to dark energy and dark matter, which Donald Trump metaphorically represents via the way his ritual impacts the collective mind. It could be referring to atomic energy in that way. Donald Trump causing a nuclear holocaust, right? Metaphorically speaking. But then at the same time, there's the detonation of the bomb twice. Once in Dark Knight Rises and then later in Oppenheimer. So I don't know, you have this potentially literal reference to the detonation of a nuclear bomb, which is then amplified by that Francis Scott Key Bridge part of the ritual, which took place in Baltimore, which is where a nuclear device explodes in The Sum of All Fears, featuring Ben Affleck, or another Batman, taking place in Baltimore right next to Washington, D.C. You have this ship colliding with a bridge, which is shown as a part of Leave the World Behind and Three Body Problem and Dark Knight Rises and Roadhouse, which features Donnie Darko in Florida, in the Keys, right? So you have all this boat, bridge, collapse, destruction, resonance to this 322 window, where Nolan also has the 322 Crocus Tenet shooting, which has the cube as a part of its flower relating back to time, which then relates back to Ukraine and those scenes in Tenet and The Dark Knight Rises, which ends in a nuclear explosion. So I don't know, there's something going on with a potential explosion along those lines that's been embedded into all of this stuff. And of course, the two actual detonations of nuclear bombs took place right before Donald Trump's birth in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. Which, go figure, just a day or two ago, there was an earthquake over in that area that produced a tsunami warning for Japan. Getting back to the idea of the flood and that image that I showed at the end of one video from a cartoon on Netflix, which shows the tidal wave coming at the Statue of Liberty with the eclipse and the helicopter, right? The whole thing is in that image. Also, Donnie Darko takes place over 28 days, and Kelly states that it was written in 28 days and filmed in 28 days. All of that 2/8 resonance, in addition to the fact that Donald Trump would be elected president 28 years after 1988. But then you have this movie 28 Days Later, released in 2002, and then 2003 in the United States of America, written by Alex Garland, who also wrote and directed Civil War, that's coming out April 12th. And 28 Days Later involves a quote-unquote rage virus that results in total societal collapse. And 28 years after 1988, when Trump is elected, you have this metaphorical and sometimes literal Trump derangement syndrome. But more broadly, it could be viewed where Trump is a rage virus that destabilized the American political system and society in general. I mean, he is very literally playing the role of a rage virus in how he functions with everything. Right? There was that article or book titled White Rural Rage or something along those lines, which connected the 1488 back into Donald Trump and rage. You have all of these clips of people on the other side just completely fuming mad because of what they think Donald Trump is and represents. And then likewise, you have all of the people who follow Trump, the kind of boomer QAnon crowd who are equally enraged at what the quote-unquote deep state is doing to the country and world in general. Trump is a literal rage virus. And in 28 Days Later, the first scene is Cillian Murphy, who played Oppenheimer in the Nolan film and was also in the Dark Knight trilogy, waking up from a coma, and the first scene is his eye, where you get this eclipse symbolism. And he played the main character in 28 Days Later, which has this resonance to Alex Garland's Civil War and Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer, the whole thing that's going on right now. I haven't seen that movie, so there might be some stuff in there, I don't know. Or some other thread along the lines of 28 Days Later that you could pursue on your own. But it also just so happens that a 28 years later sequel has just been announced in early 2024, right before this April 8th total solar eclipse. And David Benioff co-created Game of Thrones and Three Body Problem. David Benioff's father, Stephen Friedman, is former chairman of the U.S. President's Intelligence Advisory Board, a Goldman Sachs partner, former chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and served as a senior principal of Marsh & McLennan Capital Corp during 9/11. Meaning, the people in Hollywood are connected on a level that is so far beyond a normal person, and that's why it's infused with the themes that it is, because it's the same people who are playing it out in reality. That's how I knew to watch Three Body Problem, because David Benioff was involved. They make it very obvious once you know who is putting the stuff out there, which is likewise how I knew to watch a Zemeckis film with Donnie Darko, Jake Gyllenhaal as the star, right? And of course, it tied right into this whole thing, as it related to the keys, boats, and bridges. Baltimore 322, the lunar eclipse on March 25th, and then the actual collapse of the bridge a day later on March 26th. In the lead up to the Great American Eclipse, symbolically showing the destruction of the national anthem. This is a tweet from Donald Trump, or I suppose a truth? Is that what they call it? A retruth here, where he retruthed it. Unbelievable, just completely ridiculous, but very interesting that I took this screenshot with 47 retweets and 147 likes. But in any event, he's really playing up the idea of the crucifixion of Donald Trump in the lead up to Easter. And then you have these images of him holding the Bible in that very weird scene that he did it in relationship to the last eclipse in 2017. But they're playing up this crucifixion of Donald Trump narrative. They're really associating him with Christian nationalism now. That's how they're playing it for the other side. Like this will be the Handmaid's Tale type of situation. A tyrannical Christian nationalist regime that could come in through Trump that would be worse than Hitler. They're really playing that up in the media. And then on the other side, they're playing up this crucifixion idea as it relates to all the counts against him, the 88 criminal indictment counts. And that's going to play into, I think, the October 2nd Easter Island eclipse a month before the election. Some type of resurrection theme as it relates to Donald Trump. Or it could be something along the lines of what this federal judge said here, where he's worried January 6th insurrectionists could be triggered into another violent attack via Donald Trump in the lead up to or aftermath of the 2024 presidential election. And I got into that in a prior video about the ways they could take the script, right? They could achieve any of this stuff in either scenario. A Biden win where the reaction to that win is something along these lines, or a Trump win where the reaction is more in terms of what they do through his Christian nationalist quote unquote regime, which would transpire much later down the line where we have this reaction to his regime in a similar way that people reacted to Hitler in Germany. And then how Hitler is remembered in the history books along those lines. And then this is the Team Trump Twitter account, which just has this text Trump to 88022. Go figure the 88 is in his text number. But looking at it now, hopefully you have a better idea regarding the 88 and the relationship to Donnie Darko in terms of time, parallel realities, and how this whole thing is functioning in a symbolic, subconscious way. Initially, but then how that sort of has these moments where it merges together at various singularities or inflection points in the timeline where stuff branches off in all directions from it, both in reality and in the mind. And Donald Trump embodies the 88. He embodies the sun and the moon in this context and the difference between solar time and the actual time that we keep. He's taking us out of time as a resonator with this solar time that we view from the Earth. He's taking us out of time in terms of the role he is playing during the lead up to the merger of consciousness itself with digital technology, which will alter our perception of time in a way that we can already feel, where mechanical time in the real world doesn't fit with our experience anymore, which I think is the core of why Donald Trump is associated with time, given the time period in which he would be front and center as the moonchild, gravitationally pulling on the water in our bodies and the stream of consciousness itself, pulling it in the direction that they want it to go, steering it, the banks of the river, the currency exchange that symbolically took place when he went down the escalator to introduce his run for president, where he would be elected on 11/9/16. Donnie Darko. As symbolized by the metaphorical singularity when the moon eclipses the sun, or some way, shape, or form, one of the bodies eclipses the other. And in that way, The Economist magazine very literally showed it with the image of Donald Trump's head eclipsing the Earth as it related to 2024. Nobody has ever eclipsed the narrative like Donald Trump eclipses 2024. 88 Donnie Darko. I am Batman, says Donald Trump, which just sums the whole thing up, right? So I'll leave it there. You guys have a good one. Talk to you later. Peace.